Welcome back everyone to the third video of the series. I'm Iason and Tzouriadis. I'm the curator of European Edge Weapons here at the Royal Armouries in Leeds. And with me today, again, I have Matt Easton of Schola Gladiatoria. For the third and final video for now of this series, covering the weapons that the Royal Armouries have produced in collaboration with Windlass and Matt, we will be covering an early 16th century cinquedea. Now, Matt, would you like to show what we made?
Here's one I made earlier.
Yeah. So a couple of things first about the original and about the type itself. So this type of sword, I have heard this being referred to as a long knife as well. I don't know. I've learned not to be so pedantic about my perception of these things. These are usually referred to by modern arms and armour enthusiasts, researchers, collectors, and so on as cinquedeas. Now, the term itself comes from cinquediti, 5 fingers, because of supposedly the width of the blade. But itself, the term is anachronistic to the period of the use of the weapon. Now, cinquedeas can be defined as this sort of like broad-bladed sword, presumably optimized for cutting. Of course, you can thrust with it as well. The earlier depictions that we have of these, and again, it's a subject that is really understudied. The earliest that I have seen go all the way back to the late 13th century, like really early.
Wow.
But the bulk of the earlier form of the cinquedea, they do look different. Right. So, but I think abusively we can call them this because they share the same characteristics and presumably used. They were much shorter and more triangular. And you find a lot of these in paintings from the 14th century. And especially in the 15th century, you start getting shapes that look more like this. And it's interesting because we now know that this type of sword developed especially in Italy, and particularly was popular in northern Italy and central as well. And this type, this sort of shape, is popular in the very late 15th and in the early 16th century. We're talking about the first 3-4 decades. After that, they fall somewhat out of fashion. We do get them in art occasionally, and I'm referring a lot to art here because that's what we would use as modern enthusiasts of arms and armour to date something predominantly in the lack of better sources. They're quite interesting objects, and what I find fascinating about them in a sort of a meta level is that a lot of arms and armour scholars, they always refer to swords of this type as being decorative, and as being sort of unwieldy, heavy, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And I think it says a lot about how, I mean, you have experience with using arms and armour, but it's interesting that to see that if you use a blade, you instantly see this is quite the opposite, as I'm sure that you'll tell us more about later. Or now, if you'd like to. Would you like to tell us from a functional perspective, just pure function?
Well, I mean,
how do you find this?
I mean, the headline is these are crazy light. This one is super light, isn't it?
Yeah,
so I think people are used to looking at a shape
and associating
and
with
expecting it to have a certain physical. Yeah. But this is really thin with distal taper, highly flexible, which obviously we're not going to do with the original, but you can with the spring tempered, and this is really light. For anyone who has maybe used a modern, quite light garden machete, it's a similar sort of weight to that, actually, a thin-bladed machete, which we all know are very good at chopping hedges down. So they are very effective at chopping, but very, very light. So just because something's wide, don't think it's heavy.
Yeah, and it seems very easy to the hand as well. It's again very intuitive. It's as if people designing these things know exactly what they're doing.
And they knew what they wanted it to do at a time when they might have to use it.
Exactly, exactly. Now, regarding the use, there's a reason I really like cinquedeas, and especially of this type. When we're looking at the late 14th and 15th century depiction of cinquedeas, usually you see them worn by soldiers. Mm-hmm. You have not a lot, but you have many depictions of them, and often you'd see them being worn on the back of somebody, flat, or directly on the front.
Okay.
And the wearing of swords on the front has been the subject of other studies as well. It can be, of course, an allusion to the phallus as a phallic symbol with soldiers. However, again, this has been discussed in publications by colleagues that, and I think it has merit to it as an idea, that the fact that it's worn by soldiers that use something like this as a secondary weapon, you want your sides to be free because you're fighting next to others, and you usually use a pike or a different staff weapon. So you do not want to be drawing from the side where it can be caught to something else. So just something to consider. The same thing goes for the back as well. I mean, it would be flat on somebody's buttocks. But what I like about the early 16th century cinquedeas is that we have a very strong presence of them in a civic context. So they have very strong martial, non-military use. And again, we know this from period art, from frescoes, from other paintings, even sculptures. Finally, on the making part, I also found something quite interesting while I was doing research on partisans last year. I found 3 different workshops that make cinquedeas and partisans.
Huh.
And I was both surprised and suddenly completely unsurprised, because essentially, if you know what a partisan is pretty much this blade stuck on a stick.
I'd never really thought about that, but it looks like a partisan with a short hilt, doesn't it? Yeah.
And it was interesting seeing this overlap. And we have the same people not only making partisans, but different workshops that decorate cinquedeas that also decorate partisans.
Yeah, it's the same skill.
Yeah. And we have in our collection, and to tie it to the specific cinquedea here, we have partisans with that same maker mark.
Really?
on partisans.
And some of these makers in Italy were making thousands and thousands every year. So it's in a way, although I'm surprised, shouldn't be a surprise that we find ones with the same marks on.
Now, when it comes to the Italian provenance of this, not really a caveat for it, but I'm fairly certain this is a North Italian cinquedea. The question is, when did this make it into the Royal Armouries collection, as with many objects? But with the exception of our other swords, and again, even though we cannot have a conclusive answer to this, since this coincides with a period of large imports of edge weapons from Italy, it is possible that this could have made it into Britain historically in the period of its use. We cannot know. But we have a large number of spears and other staff weapons as well, bills and partisans, that made it from northern Italy into the armoury of Henry VIII, for example.
Yeah, he imported vast amounts.
Yeah, and he loved Italian edge weapons.
And that's the correct. This is Henry VIII. This is the Henry VIII's period. Yeah.
But we cannot be certain. This is again, this is speculation, but it does fit the narrative. You can see that's how it has some subtle decorative elements, including these hollow rivets with this wire sort of small design in them. I'm not going to call it floral because I'm not sure it is. I think it's just some geometrical design of sorts.
It reminds me a bit of church windows.
Yeah, like these Gothic designs. Yeah. It's a bit odd. And cinquedeas as a type of weapon are often highly decorated. We have some here in the collection. Either part of the blade or the whole blade is decorated with incredibly either etched or incised or engraved patterns and whole scenes, often inspired by history or mythology. And sometimes you see the hilts decorated with precious stones. And in some cases you have these like coins stuck in the middle of the hilt. And something that I came across recently, do you know the thing about the coin? whenever you see a coin, usually there was a precious stone there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and this was removed historically. Like usually the period it's used, and it was replaced then.
Right.
And I've come across 2 accounts of this, of people saying like took out the precious stone and they replaced it with a coin.
And are the coins of the same time as the Cinquedea, or are they Roman coins, or?
Both.
Yeah, all right.
Both, unfortunately. Yeah, because some want to allude again to the antiquity, which there is fascination, of course. We're talking about the early 16th century. The Italian Renaissance is at full throttle and in artistic production, and there's constant allusions to Roman past.
So I've always wondered, is this a 16th century North Italians idea of a classical sword? Is this them trying to hark back to the Etruscans or the Romans?
I think that's a great idea, great suggestion. The answer is I don't know. I cannot answer, and I don't think we can answer. I think they keep trying to reinvent something, and this is a very functional form as well. So maybe they're trying to allude to the past that you're saying, or maybe simultaneously they find a form that both works in reminiscing a fictional glorious past, and at the same time have a very, very functional weapon. I was surprised when you brought in the prototypes for the Cinquedea, like out of the gate. I thought that these decorative hollow rivets would have been the hardest thing to replicate.
Me too.
Out of the gate. Amazing.
No changes required.
No changes. Like I was shocked. If anything, like some of these here have been a bit squashed with time and warped, and it's very nice to see like how they would have looked like.
Yeah. Yeah, they did a great job with those, as you say, straight out of the gate.
In fact, I think that during our process, I think the only change we made was. Initially, the fullers were not running all the way through, right?
So this was a funny one because there were lots of small changes. So the first prototype they produced was a very nice Cinquedea, but it just didn't. There were lots of little things that didn't quite match the original. There were things to do with the width of certain parts of the grip and the pommel. Things. The blade had been made a little bit too short for some reason. The fullers, as you say, the fullers didn't quite end in the right place. So lots and lots of sequence of, and actually it was dialing it in was quite a lengthy process, even though there was nothing big that needed changing.
But it seemed, I thought this would be perhaps the most challenging one.
Yeah, I did.
And it ended up being rather smooth, at least from our perspective.
Yeah.
Like we dialed in details and that was perfectly fine. Now, it's very hard to see this, but the bottom of the blade is visible at the bottom of the quillons. This is because the quillons are made of 2 parts sandwiched together, holding the bottom of the blade. And then the tang is visible, on the original at least. And then you see these 2 scales, about which we'll talk a bit about later, are then riveted on to create the handle. There's no pommel in the traditional sense, but the pommel is part of the handle, formed with the material of the scales. And what is missing here, and we interpreted that because this is the norm of Cinquedeas of the period, is that a strip of brass would be fitted to cover the tangs. And we decided to go with what will probably be the optimized finished product, because we do have Cinquedeas without that strip, where the tang is visible. But this looks better, and I think most of them would feature something like this.
And that definitely had a strip, and we can even see there's remains of the glue material that was underneath the strip in there, isn't there, still there?
Now, when it comes to handle, we've made sort of a small change, both out of necessity, I guess, in the end, but we didn't know.
It was a surprise.
It was a random find. So in the years of this object being catalogued, and if you see closer to the material of the handle, this looks like dark wood.
And I didn't even question what it was made of, because I just assumed it was wood.
And frankly, like even if you look at it now, even if I told you what it is,
it looks like wood.
It looks like wood.
It's a dark wood. Yeah.
One of our conservators found that it has a certain amount of translucency, which of course wood does not have. So this is some form of organic material, most likely horn. And we do have examples of other decorative objects in northern Italy in the 15th and the early 16th century that use horn to replicate wood. Now, why did you want to do a cinquedea with us?
Since I was a teenager, I've been going in museums. And you know, I grew up in London, so the Wallace collection was my go-to, and they have got a lovely collection of cinquedeas in there. And they were always a weapon that fascinated me on one hand, but I could find very little written about or much information about them at all. Later on, when I studied the treatises and the manuals for historical European martial arts of this period, they're not even in there either. There's, you know, the closest we've got maybe is there's a section on how to fight with a knife against another person with a knife in Marozzo. That's about as close as you can get, I think. Unless some cinquedea treatise comes along, which I'd be very happy about. So we don't really have any recommend any kind of advice on how to use them from the period. We don't have an awful lot written about them. There's this mystery of their design. Like, okay, well, you could say, you know, the blades, I didn't know about the earlier types, but you could say the blades are sort of similar to an oak shop type 14 blade on earlier arming swords, but this is such a characteristic hilt. And I've always thought, were they trying to cosplay as Romans? Because, you know, that's what the Renaissance is all about.
I do find them weird, and I agree with you, and in my mind I constantly keep going back and forth the idea of why does the handle look like that? And I think you might be right. It might be a reference to earlier swords, putting away my hat as a curator, but as a sword enthusiast, because that's, in the end of the day, that's what I am. It's really nice seeing a replica of a sword that usually doesn't see much love.
Well, that's it, yeah. So, I mean, that was one of the other main reasons why I wanted to do a cinquedea, was because nobody had produced a sort of, you know, except for custom pieces, nobody had produced a sort of off-the-shelf, available, good cinquedea. I won't say some companies had produced things that were called cinquedea, but they were nothing like the originals. And this was actually, you know, it's a one-to-one model on an original. But in addition to that, I chose that particular one for a number of reasons. One reason is that it's fairly large, so it is a sword. You know, some cinquedea are really, we would call them daggers. So this is more of a sword one. But also, this particular blade fascinated me with these triple fullers changing into double fullers. Because, you know, some cinquedea have these kind of boxed off section fullers.
Yeah, where it's a 5 into 3 into 2 into 1.
Which are very cool. Very difficult to do, and some of those are very highly decorated. And I thought, is that practical? And we needed to do something that was achievable, but still ambitious. And this triple fuller option with a plain blade is ambitious, but achievable with what we were working with. So at the end of the day, we've got something which is, it's not the biggest cinquedea in the world, but it's towards the upper end of the spectrum. It's fairly large, it's sword sized, and has these really, really attractive fullers. And one other thing that I thought was fascinating was how the fullers go out of the tip. Now, a lot of people, when they see fullers going out of the tip, they go, oh, it's been shortened. Now, that can be the case if we see something like a Highland dirk with the fuller going out of the end. It's because it's been made of a broken sword blade and changed into a dirk. So that can be the case. But it's just, I just thought that was really unusual and intriguing that the fullers run out of the tip, and yet there's no sign that this has been shortened.
I agree. I think it's both in the account of the fullers being originally there, but also for choosing this piece as this sort of like median solution between the super high-end cinquedeas that do really, in the lack of a better term, funky things with both fullers and decoration, or the slightly simpler ones where they simply have the two large fullers. And especially it's there where you see the similarity with partisans. Like two very large fullers running along the blade. So these were swords for, and this specifically, this sword, was most likely for somebody who had a decent amount of wealth to be able to afford this, because it still has decorative elements, and or even a wealthy soldier. A wealthy, rather military professional, I would say, because soldier is a bit of a weird term in the 16th century. It's a very nice choice, and it is one of my favorites as well. So
it handles.
Yeah.
It handles beautifully,
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
it? I mean, it's so lively in the hand. And I think it's also amazing when you consider that this is a sword that's around at the same time. Okay, the Katzbalger is sort of similar in size and function, but it's around at the same time as the side sword is becoming the early kind of rapiers, and you know, it's around at the same time as lots of other very different types of sword. So I find it functionally very interesting as well.
We hope you enjoyed this third and final video of this series on the weapons developed by the Royal Armouries in collaboration with Matt, Easton and Windlass. We hope that you like cinquedeas as much as we do. And remember that now you can make yours a part of history as replicated from objects in the Royal Armouries collection. Have a lovely day, and do not forget to like and subscribe to the Royal Armouries channels here on YouTube, on Instagram, Facebook, and on other social media. Also, do not forget to check out Matt's channel on YouTube at Schola Gladiatoria, where he provides plenty of information on a variety of topics pertaining to arms and armour and history. And as he usually says, context is everything. Have a lovely day.